I'd like to give a land acknowledgement here at the University of California, Santa Barbara. We sit on the lands and unceded lands and waters of the Chumash peoples, and we want to acknowledge their presence here. And we want to acknowledge ongoing institutional responsibilities to the Chumash peoples, responsibilities that the university hasn't always lived up to. We at the CAP Center are eager to be part of a group of folks on campus who are seeking to make some difference on that front. Later, we'll talk about repatriation policies, I hope, and that's one modest way we're trying to do the work of making good on something like a land acknowledgement. Now, I would like to introduce Patty Limerick to you all. She is a path-breaking historian and public scholar of considerable renown who has run a wonderful entity, the Center of the American West, for several decades. The latter piece is what motivated me to invite her. The CAP Center and I could surely do no better in our quest for mentors and models. We at the center have so much to learn from her work, successes, and setbacks. I should say at the outset that Patty and I are old friends, going back nearly 30 years, if my math is right. It is such a pleasure to welcome Patty to our community at this time, and I look forward to the day when she can visit us in person for a proper meal and a walk, I hope. For those of you who are less familiar with this most amazing scholar citizen, let me briefly read some passages from her bio. Patty Limerick is the faculty director, the chair of the board of the Center of the American West at the University of Colorado, where she is also professor of history. Limerick has dedicated her career to bridging the gap between academics and the general public and to demonstrating the benefits of applying historical perspective to contemporary dilemmas and conflicts. Limerick was born and raised in Banning, California, and graduated from the University of California at Santa Cruz in 1972. She received her PhD in American Studies from Yale University in 1980, and from 1980 to 1984, she was assistant professor of history at Harvard. In 1984, Limerick moved to Boulder to join the history department of the University of Colorado. In 1985, she published Desert Passages, followed in 1987 by her best-known work, The Legacy of Conquest, an overview and reinterpretation of Western American history that has stirred up a great deal of both academic and public debate. Limerick has received a number of awards and honors recognizing the impact of her scholarship and her commitment to teaching, including the MacArthur Fellowship. Limerick has served as president of the Organization of American Historians, American Studies Association, the Western History Association, and the Society of American Historians. But again, it's her work at the Center of the American West that draws our attention here. She and Charles Wilkinson founded the center in 1986, and Patty has been at the helm for years, and she coordinates such a range of activities. It's really extraordinary. Such a great model for what university life can be and should be, and a model I frankly aspire to emulate as much as possible. Welcome, Patty Limerick.
Thank you. Thank you for having me kind of here, but maybe really there, which would be here when I'm there, when we can travel again. That would be great. I would love to be there in person sometime.
Okay, well, I'm having difficulty with my... I'm having a little difficulty with my screen. Out there we go. You would think we would have Zoom all dialed in by now, but alas, here we are. Okay. Fantastic. So let's start big if we can, and then we'll dial in towards some more specific issues. Applied history. This has been your world for decades. It's something you've done. It's something you've been writing about. You still write about it. What's your thinking about applied history in this contemporary moment?
Well, in this company, which is to say with you, it is important for me to say that I, for a long time, said applied humanities, and okay. I'm quite willing to shift back to that. I do hang out mostly in the field of history, but I so think this should include English, philosophy, art, history, I mean, religious studies, certainly. So I am not drawing a disciplinary boundary because I think we have wasted quite a bit of time in the academic world drawing disciplinary boundaries. If we could have done less of that, we might have happier lives and more impact. So applied history, I couldn't imagine why we wouldn't be just taking an opportunity every day. Whenever a conflict or dilemma appears, the first responders should be, well, I'm going to go with my discipline with historians. The moment that calamity starts to take shape, there should be historians there giving the context, giving the background, because it is really a bad situation when you can only exist in the present moment and only respond in the present moment. You need to have, as quickly as you can, your bearings in time. You need to be able to say, okay, we're in a dilemma now. Where did this dilemma come from? What can we learn from how we got here as to how we're going to deal with it and how we're going to get beyond it? So it's very peculiar that historians should never get in the way of EMTs or ambulances or anything else. We should really just go, oh, pardon us, we'll just back off for a moment. But as soon as they have done their work, we should just be in there. And we live in an amnesiac society. You live in a society where people bump into things and bump into each other and spend a preposterous amount of time blaming each other for situations that originated long before any of us were born. So it is really, it would be funny if it weren't disheartening and tragic and discouraging that we spend that much time blaming each other. But anyway, historians, I think, have a most excellent opportunity to be applied. I will say I probably, if I left a paper trail or a record of what I was doing, I probably was trying to borrow some of the magic, some of the money from the sciences. I know that there's a real conflict within science fields between pure science and applied science. I know that's not unusual for them, but they do seem to have a better sense of what we're doing might cure disease, or what we're doing might just counter climate change, or might offer an alternative to fossil fuel energy. So scientists and engineers, I think, have been doing applied work, some dis-ease, but mostly with a sense of this is what we can do and this is how we can make the world better. And so I wanted to be in the humanities zone doing that, saying, well, to be frank, that engineers and natural scientists would do better in life and would have more positive impacts if they traveled around with humanities companions. If they had us along to say, ooh, we want to be a little bit careful there. That's where the landmines are. That's where the misfortunes have occurred. That's where good intentions have led to, have built the road to, well, I don't want to say to hell, that's not, we're on a religious studies thing. Anyway, good intentions do in fact come with different destinations, and one of them is making a bad situation worse. So helpful to not have engineers and natural scientists offering solutions and thinking about problems without historians there to say, you need to know where you are in time and where you are in place. And now let's see what you can do with your design skills and so on. So
yeah, absolutely. This all rings so true of what I know of your work and the work of the center. The disciplinary issue, right? I quipped in an email that we might call this, if we're for the non-historians in the room, I think of this as the practical ethics of academic engagement beyond our own borders, that the borders being our institutions and the way we, whether it's disciplinary disputes, but also the university writ large, how we cordon ourselves off through language practices, among other things, from the world around us. And you've done so much work to dissolve that and to make this much more real. And I want to get into that. But let me tell a very quick story, if I might, about one of our first meetings almost 30 years ago. And our mutual friend, the great Lynn Ross Bryant, had insisted that I be part of a workshop you put together on American religion in the West. And as a young graduate student, I hadn't even taken my exams yet. I thought, what an opportunity, how wonderful. We each gave our papers and you responded. And your response to mine was you hit two nerves, shall we say, raw nerves in the best way. So I had been writing about material objects, indigenous material objects in the Southwest, and non-native people's fascination with them, and how we might theorize that fascination. And really the paper, as is the case with so many graduate students, it was a paper about theory and theories about theories. And in your response, you were generous as always. And then you said, but then what? What do we do with this? And then you said, we could do this kind of work. In other words, theorizing, jargonizing, and so forth, until we're, and your phrase was, we are blue in the face. And I thought, ouch, because I was in fact blue in the face. I think I am still tired from graduate school, learning theory, learning how to make things obscure through language and jargon. And you so diagnosed the problem that I had to smart just a little bit from that. But the second nerve you hit simultaneously was that you caused me to recognize the situation I had been facing for some time, for a few years in graduate school. That is this looming question: how does this matter? How does talking to ourselves about ourselves in a coded language of specialization matter? And I was beginning to lose faith in that. I was taking the wrong path, which was just try to master the language and make what you can of it. And your call was a shake me up to say, no, the people you're talking about, they're real. The world they live in is real. There are actually laws about these kinds of things. Maybe go do some of that work and see. Well, it's taken me a while, but I'd like to think that in a bumbling way, I've become, if not a historian, a religious studies scholar with a keen interest in public life. And so that's both a way to invite you to apologize and to thank you for shaking me to a more awakened state.
I have upgraded my performance in various ways. And one thing now that I apparently wasn't doing at the time when I had the chance to speak to you at that event, I now am very scrupulous with graduate students. And I do I was part of the Mellon Foundation. I do get to work with a lot of graduate students or recent PhDs, and I'm scrupulous in saying, chat with me, by all means, chat with me, get some ideas, but do what you have to do to get that degree.
Yeah.
So I'm very scrupulous in saying, if I say, oh, wow, has this got relevance? Oh man, the world could be so brought back, given its bearings, if you would just stop speaking in jargon and so on. Pay no attention to me until the degree is in hand.
Yeah. And I suppose we could sometimes tell a similar story about those under the tenure clock, that they also have to play by certain rules, which we all recognize. No, that's fantastic. No, it's mostly, I was flagging a debt of gratitude.
Oh, I thought I did that, and I'll be doing that till I'm blue in the face myself.
Okay, well, good.
But it's just such a, I'm going to use the comparison that seems the most apt to me, that what happens in the training of a young person with a very lively mind and a lot of energy, what happens in that training is to really cut off an energy source that the world and society really needs. So the comparison I sometimes use is that what happens in universities and graduate programs in the strangest way replicates the geographical arrangement, where we have abundant sources of wind and solar energy, very distantly located from the cities where people need the electricity. So it's unfortunate. I mean, I'm not blaming the creator for that. I mean, that's what we have, is we have wind and solar. Where there's a very undense population. What we need transmission lines, and that's why it's very lovely to find that you can have some very good photovoltaic cells and arrangements and so on, but you have to know how you're going to get that energy to the people who need it. And that's what I think has been very deficient in humanities higher education, is that we're generating all the time, generating up a story. We're just generating up all kinds of ideas and all kinds of ways of putting them together. And theory can sharpen the mind and give a prosaic pedestrian observation, real depth and so on. But we have this very strange custom where we have all of these idea and insight generating facilities charging away, and there's no transmission lines.
Yes.
There's very few.
No, that analogy rings so true. And it brings me to my second kind of topic and question. a transmission line that you have long relied upon, and that I so wish to learn more about, is how you draw students into this process. You transmit to them, and in transmitting your work to them, you draw in community members. So I want to move in a minute to talk about community engagement as well. But when I first got to know you in the center, I was so struck by the many different ways you would seek to draw in undergraduate students. And I emphasize this because we at the CAP Center do this as well. And I'm new in my position, as you know, and I inherited some great programs, and a new one, a civic engagement program. And we have a program that places students with various nonprofit entities, really fantastic. But nonetheless, there's always more to be done, more ways to try to foster community. And your model, if you could just say a few words about how you got inspired to really reach out to undergraduates, what's been most successful, and then how community members really resonate with those kids. I've seen it, I know it.
Of course. So I'll just say that in general, back when we used to have people travel to come give talks here, and they were noted and accomplished people, we would have the middle-aged and older people could go sit in a big auditorium and hear this distinguished speaker, and that was great. It was wonderful. And we would always make sure, and we'll do this again when we get to have visitors again, but for instance, we had Ken Burns here a few years ago for the Stegner Award, and that was 2,000 people sitting in Mackey Auditorium. And that was great. It was wonderful. It's very nice. I got to interview him. I think I disarmed him and got him to say some things he might or might not say in other settings and in front of 2,000 people. It's pretty fun. We all sang the song that appears in many of his films, Hard Times Come Again No More. And if you know Ken Burns's personal history and his pretty emotionally trying childhood, his mother was very ill and so on. Anyway, he has Hard Times Come Again is in most of the films he makes, if it could apply. So we didn't tell him we were going to do that. We put the words up on the screen at the end of the interview, and we all sang with Ken Burns, Hard Times Come Again No More. And it's very intense. I mean, I know he's a very accomplished, very confident, but to see him singing with us, 2,000 people singing Hard Times Come Again No More with somebody who certainly had emotional hard times as a child, it was great. So that's the kind of stuff we would do. Everyone could be there. It was very nice. What was probably nicer was 5 or 6 hours before that, 42 undergraduates in a room with him.
Wow, awesome.
Just asking whatever they wanted. Gets better. This gets better because I am the, seem a little bit oblique here, but I am the MC of the fundraiser every year for State History Day, where it's like a science fair for children, teenagers doing history projects. So I had done that a week or two before, and a couple of students had done an extraordinary film. They were 14, 15 years old, and they had done a film on Korean War brides, and it was really intense. And History Day is always a case where the young people are so outperforming their elders and dealing with complicated history. I mean, the adults just look like they're lame. They are lame. But the kids just go into very serious subjects. So anyway, so I go up to the podium after these 3 or 4 young people have presented, and they may be pushing 16. I mean, they are really young. So I say, that was so wonderful. I'm weeping. It was so moving. I said, I think I can make this work. I shouldn't promise this in front of everybody. I think I can get Ken Burns to watch your film and comment. Uh-oh, I said that in front of everybody. I don't really know if I can get Ken Burns and comment out, but he did that. We sent him the film, and then we walked into the auditorium for a sound check, and the teacher had brought, at my request, the teacher had brought these 3 or 4 kids and a couple of other just fans, but Ken Burns walked up to this set of children, really, who had made this film, and he said, "I saw your film," and they just go,
yeah.
And then he said, "This is so fascinating." He said, "Do you want me to say what I thought was good about it, or do you want to hear what I think could be better?" And these mature beyond their years kids said, "Tell us what could be better." Oh my goodness. I mean, I might be tearing up here because it was just such a great thing to see. Right. So you can do some wonderful things with a accomplished person and a public event, and everyone can be moved and it can be very intense. But if you can get that accomplished person in a room, well, with 3 or 4 young people or with 40, and they can all ask him whatever they would want to ask him, and he will speak to them frankly.
Yeah.
And honestly, I mean, then I suppose at that moment you could just say, my work here is done.
Yeah.
And part the planet, because it's really good. So I also, I'm going to use another story where I was invited 15 or more years ago. I guess I was invited to go to the UCross Foundation in Wyoming, which is in an area where there is oil and gas development.
Mhm.
And they had done an art show of photographs of landscapes where oil and gas development was. And then I was invited to come there and preside, moderate, or lead a seminar, well, not even a seminar, just a public event with ranchers who were very disturbed about subsurface development on their lands, and for good reason. We got to see, we spent a day or two touring, and we saw all kinds of disrupted landscapes. So I was to lead a public forum with surface owners, ranchers concerned about oil and gas development, and a number of people from the oil and gas industry. So that is going to be my mission, is I'm going to keep that calm, and I'm going to, well, I'm not going to keep it calm, but I'm going to keep it from turning into a shouting match. So,
Yeah.
So I had 2 students with me. I had Christine and Matt, and they had studied oil and gas issues in our class, in our junior seminar or something like that. So I had said to them, this will be intense, and some people will be very agitated. So your mission, not should you choose to accept it, because they had to accept it.
Yes.
Your mission will be, when we take a coffee break, you will have observed who in the group is the most intensely on fire with strong feelings about this. And you will go to that person at the coffee break.
Yeah.
And don't get in the way of him and his coffee. Don't do that. But as soon as he's got his coffee, say to some version of, we've been studying this in class, and we could certainly tell that you really know this subject. And if you wouldn't mind terribly, we're just learning. We just were learning. So could you tell us some of why you were saying what you were saying?
Yeah.
Well, all righty. So a person could be just an insufferable bully to others in a setting where you're going to shout in a public hearing, as the former mayor of Missoula state legislator Dan Kemmis used to say, we call them public hearings, which is odd because nobody's doing any hearing.
Right.
Except for the poor souls like me who are moderating. So anyway, so give it a try, young folks. So Matt and Christine in the coffee breaks went to, like, heat-seeking instruments. They went directly to the most agitated people. They said, hi, could you help us understand a little bit more about what you were speaking of? And so, and they were, I think they were 20 and 19 at that time.
Yeah.
Very earnest. And so then we would then go back into the group, and sometimes the agitated people would still be shouting and agitated. The one who was the most agitated on that occasion, the most just panned up all the time, mad at me because I'm not calling him, mad at me. So he gets worked over by Matt and Christine during one of the coffee hours, and then he comes in, sits back down, and then he's doing it again. His hand is up and he's glaring at me. And I say, look, I'm so sorry. I've got like 5 people in front of you. I'm gonna call on them first, so you're gonna have to wait. So he waits, and then I say, okay, you're on now. He said, I've pretty much said what I had to say, what I needed to say. I don't go to somebody else. So now at a certain age, you can't do that anymore. Don't try it, Greg. Don't try it. Don't try to be Matt and Christine. It's not going to work because it just doesn't work. You can do other things that are good, that are disarming and good. But having young people in the mix at those things is just astounding. It's just, it's so, well, Lincoln's phrase that is a real address, that the better angels of their nature, they're there.
Yeah.
But we could, a lot of the rest of us could wait around a long time before those angels would show a little wing even, but a student asking an earnest question can just, the angels are out.
Yeah, that sounds so right to me. And I've seen you do this in a number of settings, and I'm heartened by it. I'm looking forward to the opportunities to do that kind of work here for sure. let's move to a specific subset of students you've been working with quite a bit lately, based on our most recent conversation. And I'm talking, as you know, about student veterans. And when we had this conversation a month ago over lunch, you told me about your passion for this work with student veterans. And I shared with you that the Walter Capps Center here has a history of doing this kind of work, that Walter Capps himself taught a legendary course at UCSB on the Vietnam War that was about veterans, but also enfranchised them to come to class, get to know students and so forth. And evidently it was just a pillar of the university life here for many, many years. And then Clark Roof, under his directorship of the center, kept that going, and Richard Heck taught the course and so forth. So quite a legacy here. Now in the present, Susan Derwin at the Interdisciplinary Humanities Center does a writing workshop with student veterans. So this is a topic near and dear to this campus at UCSB, and something the Capps Center would like to really reinvigorate from our side. And so we would love to hear from you about your work with student veterans. What's animated? Where are you headed? What kinds of things are you doing with them?
Well, okay, so I have been, it couldn't be said I have been preparing for this opportunity in any conscious way. But when I look back at earlier episodes of my life, this seems to have been where I was headed. So, and some of it is, of course, just providence and nothing that I could possibly have anticipated or intended. So when I was in Banning, California, a small town, I remember my older sister, who was 9 years older than I am, being very troubled because Willie Lyons, who was a reservation on the edge of our town, Kuya folks, and so Willie Lyons had been killed in Vietnam. He had graduated with my sister, my big sister, and I was quite young, and I thought, well, what's exactly this Vietnam thing? So I remember very vividly when my sister's friend was lost there, and there seems to be every indication that he was really going to be a significant Native leader. And okay, so then I graduated in 1968, and George Lopez and Lynn Shugart graduated with me, and I went to college, and they went to Vietnam, and both of them died there. And I think that Lynn maybe had just turned 19, maybe it wasn't that, and George was a year or two older. So I've never forgotten any of those things. And I'm not going to say I have survivor's guilt, but I also have a very clear there but for fortune.
Yeah.
So, okay, so then various things would happen from time to time that I was asked here 15 or so years ago, when I think just very soon after the Iraq invasion and several years after the Afghanistan invasion. Not quite sure why my name came up, but I got to chair a 2-day public program on the hidden injuries of war. And at first I thought, okay, I know that I'm to be here so that we don't go off track and talk about Congress and bad decision making, and we're going to concentrate on the veterans. Sitting in the front, not far from me, I realized finally was a fellow who had, so I guess some of the drugs that you give to hold off malaria can have very bad psychiatric effects. So this person had been discharged for refusing duty he was a traitor, but he just wasn't performing. But it turns out it was really the anti-malaria drug that had done that. And there he was, quite restored, quite mentally healthy, but with this desertion. I think they charged him with desertion. So even though there was clear evidence about well, anyway, so he's sitting a few feet away from me. Many things like that are happening over the course of 2 days. And I'm again thinking, they asked me because I will keep the subject from drifting off to policy fights. And then I thought, I think they asked me because they thought I could hold myself together, which it did. But really with a sense of, could I just go out for a few minutes? And well, okay, so for years I've been trying to say, it drove me wild that we had we had interventions, we had wars going on, but no one was, it was quite different from Vietnam, where we at least knew that we had a war going on and we might have different feelings about it. But the sort of off the edge of attention, all sorts of young folks being sent overseas, or and civilian obliviousness. So I didn't like that. And I certainly didn't have any vision of what I was going to do about that, besides thinking, I don't like that. Which academics, we really like doing that from time to time. Academics can really puff. I'm not going to like that. I'm not liking that a bit. I'm still not liking that. So I'm afraid I was not too far away from that kind of conduct. Then I was the president of the Organization of American Historians. The Department of Defense was supposed to had congressional mandate to launch a 50th anniversary of the Vietnam War, which of course goes for quite a number of years. They got out of the gate poorly. The Department of Defense didn't have any historians work on it. They had a very flawed website with historical errors on it and so on. So academic historians were quite angry. They thought the Organization of American Historians should condemn this commemoration for how poor. I thought, oh no, I'm president of the Organization of American Historians. I want to know what happened. So one thing led to another. I ended up finding a remarkable man, career military, recently retired, Colonel Mark Franklin, who was the head of the Heritage and Education Division of the Vietnam War commemoration. And he and I worked together in a very excellent way of bringing the academic historians in and getting their coaching and their advice and accepting their expertise and so on. So then I come back to Boulder and I think, oh, if you were part of this commemoration, you get to be a commemoration partner, mostly VFW posts, American Legion posts, but some universities. So I think, oh, I want to do that. Then I think, oh man, people my age who were anti-war protesters and who are professors now, oh man,
Yeah.
that's the rest of my life trying to persuade them to work with the Department of Defense. Is that going to happen? No. So I was very despairing. And then I thought I really needed an ally on this campus. That led me to the Office of Veteran and Military Affairs on campus. That led me to meet our spectacular director of that program, who actually had just arrived pretty recently and who was doing all kinds of things that were innovative and utterly wholehearted in making that transition from the military to a campus viable and sometimes really enjoyable. So this fellow, Stu Elliott, created a thing called the Summer Bridge and then the Winter Bridge. And he has folks who are coming out of the various services, and they have a 2-week program. And some of it is really, okay, here's a sample writing assignment. And now we'll see, what do we do with that? Because as much as I am respectful of what they have gained from that, great writing skill doesn't always come from military training. So to have a little bit, I don't know where it does come from, but it doesn't necessarily correlate to that. So they get various forms of academic training, science classes, how to conduct yourself in a science class. So you're really getting, and you're not getting bogged down in details, but you're really tracked. Anyway, all kinds of good things happen. And then the last thing that happens is a professor's panel. And because I had gotten to know Stu Elliott, I got to be on the professor's panel. And my goodness, what an attentive audience. If you were used to a regular old lecture class with folks in the back who seem not to have fully enrolled in college just yet sometimes, you go in to talk to an audience of student veterans and they're with you. So for a while, and some of them, 1 or 2 of them would almost always come up and talk to me, and then they would, some of them would join, affiliate with Center of the American West, do our certificate, some would take a class, some would just visit. But most of them are majoring in science and engineering. And it took me a while to refine my pitch to say, well, what I was saying earlier, that anyone in science and engineering is going to be better off if you have a humanities perspective available to you. And I do know lots of people in all forms of engineering practice and so on. So that has really upped the number of students involved with me. Meanwhile, the director, Stu Elliott, decided to give me an office. So I am now the campus partner for the Office of Veteran and Military Affairs. And for a while, all I did was have my name on a website. Then I thought, I really need to get moving on this. So I have done things now, like I've had hosted an event when some of the student veterans said that they would like to talk to Vietnam veterans, especially during the Afghanistan withdrawal, to talk about the departure from Saigon. So I've got to organize an evening for some of my friends who are Vietnam veterans to visit with these global war on terrorism veterans. I have found ways to, well, next week, one of my major achievements, we are going to present to the Boulder Faculty Assembly on the Student Veterans Program. So for whatever reason, that wasn't happening before an academic came in to ask for that. So there had been a couple of, maybe not even overtures in the right places, but I was really fortunate to, in my job as campus partner, just to contact the wonderful woman who's the chair of Boulder Faculty Assembly and just say, would it be possible, could I bring my pals in to talk about this program and what it means to be on the GI Bill and what we should have in mind as we're, if we have someone who might be in a little bit of academic trouble, but how do we make sure that that doesn't in any way, well, anyway, that's that kind of stuff. So how to make sure that we are maximizing their success, which they are maximizing a great deal of the time too, but how can we be alert? So anyway, so we're presenting the Boulder Faculty Assembly next Friday. We have 15 or 20 minutes to do that. So I feel that, and during the pandemic, I was really fortunate to know a few of them who were just off in their apartments doing remote learning. And we did a lot of chatting and consulting. I co-authored a couple of pieces with them in that phase. I mean, Zoom is weird, but you can put a share screen document up there if you're co-authoring something. And then you and the young person can look at your co-authored thing. Bob Drawn, a wonderful fellow Army veteran, he and I wrote a piece for the Denver Post on the difference between patriotism and nationalism, and how that had guided him in his service and how he had seen veterans deal with that. So I just followed his lead really, but it was co-authored. And so we'd meet on Zoom and we'd put our manuscript up there, and then we could just go over it. And I could say, this is odd. I might have been the one who wrote the sentence, but I'm not the least bit sure what I meant by it. Could you help me? Bob, what was it I could have meant there? Was it something you said that I responded to? And so a wonderful experience in co-authoring. And then also with another one of the, Zach Giuliano, who very strong feelings about police use of military equipment.
Oh, right. So
all I did with him was work on that manuscript just as his coach. And then I just wrote an introduction to that. So it just is, and I forgot, what to me is, this is no one else, but I would say this is the most important thing. Nobody else will ever join me in saying this, but given my history on the planet, I have to say this is the most, there are many wonderful parts of this involvement. Yeah. And I do have a character oddity of an irrepressible sense of humor. And I go really fast from saying something that is pretty funny to something that is pretty sad and pretty forthright about tragedy. So, and I'm back the humor, then I'm back, I swerve back and I'm back on a humorous remark. And for many normal people that who have just had normal lives, that is quite bewildering, of me zigging and zagging along with the humor and the seriousness. In the military, in military service, having a robust sense of humor is just crucial. It is absolutely crucial. So I feel like these young folks are the ones who just don't have any disorientation. When I don't put on my turn signal, but I shift fast from funny to serious, they're just, yeah, okay. And what I think is delightful, this is humiliating, but delightful, a few times they have made, two of them have made a joke, which I have been, which I have missed the humor of, and I thought they were serious. And so they say something that is very funny, and I missed the departure of the train there, and I'm saying, really? And then they have to say to me, that was a joke. Oh, no, that never happens. I'm always the first one to get it, but no. So just having this wonderful sense of fighting each other. I guess there's no question that they're in a different phase. A number of them are very frank about saying they enlisted because they just college didn't have their attention at that time, but now it does. And it's really interesting to see well, it came up in a forum we were talking about recently, to what degree could and should they be leaders for their fellow students? I had one student in a class 3 or 4 years ago who was a student veteran. He'd been a sergeant, and he was placed on a team with 3 other students to do a team project and a team presentation. And I know he did not order the other 3 around, but he led them.
Yeah.
And the quality of that presentation was striking.
Yeah.
So it's like we have this extraordinary resource on the campus, and they should certainly be students first. That's what they are now. And I think for a good number of the student veterans on campus, that's what they've chosen. They don't care to be in the veteran category, but we just do have these people who really are, it's a cliche, but wise beyond their years in many cases. And I will say the one thing that I think, I'm not sure if how much I was ever on the wrong course with this, but one thing I did learn, and they're very funny about explaining this, the pattern of our people being the civilian people, of thinking, oh, look at this, here's a fellow who served. Thank you for your service. No, I mean, it is so unmistakably superficial, and it's not going to say, could you tell me more about that? Or if you have some time, could we talk about that? And so one of them, well, the one was his sergeant, said that for instance, this is just a funny little story here, that when he had to have his men under his command, when they were supposed to do something that was just stupid, some officer wanted them to just make sure that there weren't any cigarette butts around where people would go outside. So he would say, you must go pick up these cigarette butts. And they'd say, we don't want to do that. And he would say, thank you for your service.
Classic.
So, and I know there's just, I mean, that's what is bad is, and good heavens, I mean, National Public Radio every day and a half, Quill Lawrence does a story about the gap between the military and the civilians in our country. And it's not omnipresent, and there's plenty of people, there are plenty of mixed marriages, for heaven's sake, there's plenty of crossing of that boundary, but it's not good that have such a absence of recognition.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing these stories and insights. Tell me if you know of off the top of your head, are the mandates, at least as you experience them on the Boulder campus, are they adequately funded? And then the follow-up is, can you point us towards resources we may not be aware of in terms of available federal funds for supplementing resources for veteran students?
I don't know that much about the federal fund stuff.
Okay.
I do know about how appealing this is to donors.
Okay.
And I have been eager to tell well, there are many people I know who could testify to this, that if I know somebody who has given to the university who I think might be able to give more, they are going to hear my stories about how excellent this is. And then there's the old concept, lead by example. And my own will has taken a new direction from this, because I don't want to be telling anybody to do something that I think I wouldn't do that myself, or I choose not to do that myself. I mean, my nephews and niece, they'll do fine too, but I did put that in there because if the summer bridge, I should say the summer bridge and winter bridge program, those are great because they do ease the transition from military to college, but also in those 2 weeks, cohorts of friends form. So I've seen groups at the end of the 2 weeks where I think, oh, they must have served together. Then I think, no, they're in different branches of the military. No, but they met there, and that is very lasting. It's really, really lasting. So my own feeling was that I don't know religious studies is very important, but I don't actually really know what my status will be after I have passed away. But I do know that if this were possible, okay, so if the summer and winter bridge programs, which are just funded year by year by a donor or donors, if that went away and I had departed the planet and those two programs didn't continue, I would come back and haunt everyone. I would just do that. I would just think, okay, I'll go away as soon as you get this back up and running. But those were spectacular programs. And so that would be one option, would be for me to hang around afterwards and haunt. The other would be just to make sure that my will reflects what I would like to see happen after my passing. So, okay, but there's a little fundraising pitch, wasn't it? That was.
Yeah, right to the very end. No, thank you. That's very powerful. Well, we have a lot of work to do on our end to learn the landscape here, but as I already said, the campus here has a history of addressing this issue, and so it's not reinventing the wheel. It's a question of how do we re-engage, and your stories really helped me and us think about that. So thank you. So folks, we're going to have one more topic really to cover, and then we'll shift gears. Professor Limerick has graciously agreed to stay on for a bit after the hour for a brief Q&A session. So as we continue to talk, please post your questions in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to get to them once we've rounded out our conversation. So Patty, if you would, I had told you in conversation and then in an email that UCSB, here we are a day late and $1 short, but we're finally getting around to taking repatriation seriously on this campus. And for those of you who don't know, repatriation in this usage means the return of human remains and cultural objects from institutions, so this university, to the people from whom they came. So in this case, we're talking about native human remains and principally Chumash human remains and cultural objects. The university has many hundreds, if not thousands, of human remains stored here. And the University of California system has a new policy on repatriation that's really quite visionary. It models itself after the federal Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, but it goes further to tip the balance in favor of Native evidence, Native claims, as kind of opens the aperture on what cultural affiliation might look like and do and so forth. So it's really quite wonderful. I'm proud to say I've been asked to be part of the campus committee and eager to help getting going on this work, but we're really just starting. Now, Patty, I know you've been in the world of repatriation principles and policies really for decades. You've had the great fortune to be close with some of the people who really agitated for repatriation policy and law from the get-go, Vine Deloria Jr. and then Walter Echohawk, among others. So you've been part of some of this brainstorming and action in different kinds of contexts, federal level, state level, institutional level. So as we embark on this work and the CAP Center seeks to be a partner in this work, what kind of thoughts do you have? Well, first, if you have a story or two about what you know about repatriation, why it matters, some anecdotes and so forth, we would love to hear those. And then if you have any suggestions for best practices, and I'm thinking in particular about potentially contentious consultations where there are multiple stakeholders and we need to really hone our listening capacities, what you were talking about earlier of hearing. These are often called hearings. Well, who actually has their ears open, and how do we discipline ourselves to function best in those kinds of moments, if that makes sense?
Right. Well, okay, I do have some thoughts about that, and I'm going to start with what I think is I want to get certainly very soon to what it means to Native people, but what I feel is most wearing to me with public attitudes towards Indian people, non-Indian people's attitudes, is that really extraordinary persistence of the vanishing Indian thing. And Indian populations did shrink from disease and malnutrition and violence, and then they resurged. But for whatever reason, the non-Indian population of the United States seems to have kept its attention on the vanishing and the dropping and shrinkage of the population of the late 19th century and early 20th century, and not really tracked it is an astounding story of persistence and resilience. It is astounding, but it's only astounding if you know it, if you pay attention to it. So I have been really struck by that inability to get they're still here, which is so evident if you're aware of it being evident. So I've certainly seen, oh my goodness, I mean, any number of times where people, and again, I want to stress that a lot of the folks who have this misapprehension are good-hearted people. So maybe 20 years ago, a graduate student and I went around the West, and we had forums, all kinds of places. We went all sorts of places, and we had, I'm not sure exactly how we advertised them, but we had these public gatherings, which were, what should every Westerner know was our question. And we wanted the people in Bend, Oregon to tell us what they thought Westerners should know. Phoenix, we went all kinds of places. And everywhere we went, I mean, this is, I think, literally true. We always started when we said, so what should every Westerner know about the American West? Wherever we were, someone would say, a non-Indian person would say, well, we must remember the people who were here before us. And we'd say, yes. And then they'd move on to another subject. And, and the graduate student and I got a little bit just entranced. So we weren't exactly on the edge of our chairs, but we were thinking, will it happen somewhere? Will someone say, and that's why we contribute here to the tribal college? Or something, just something that was
give it some traction. It's like our land acknowledgements. And as you would say, and then what?
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. So we must remember, we always heard that we must remember. And then we were on to various other issues of which I guess almost every issue that came up involved Native people. I mean, the local folks might say, well, let's talk about water. Well, okay, let's talk about water and winners' rights. But I would be so surprised if any of the people we were talking to knew about the reserved rights of Winter's decision of 1908 that
Sure.
Applied. So that is really unfortunate that notion of Indian people in the Edward Curtis manner trapped in the past. It's a Richard Rodriguez, who's not everybody's, well, who's one of my favorite writers, but he actually, in one of his essays, he said, Indian people will finally be eliminated by the use of a sharp tool called an alas. So that mournful regret, alas.
Oh, yeah.
Alas, yeah. Just alas, it works better in print and type.
Right.
So that, oh, we feel so bad about what we did to the Indians. Oh, we feel so bad. Well, then stop doing it,
Right.
So stop doing it. And that's what I think repatriation is. I was going to say heaven sent, and I thought, well, that's an odd thing to say, but I think it is heaven sent because it is the way to say, hey, we're aware of the injuries of the past and we're not paralyzed by them.
Right.
We're not, and we don't think that you vanish. We don't think that for a moment. So, and we are so privileged to have something we can do that doesn't reverse the injuries of the past or erase them or anything like that. It's not that, but it says we're doing our best. And it's not just an empty, we must honor the people of the distant past who aren't here anymore. That was never, well, curious why that got going, because it did. But anyway, so that's what I think is so remarkable about repatriation, is that it just has that very grounded way of saying we're free of fatalism.
Yeah.
And a sense of inevitability. There's nothing that says we have, because things went badly in the past, that we must stay on a moving sidewalk and continue in that direction. So I think that's really important. And it's so I can't think of any, I mean, where could there be a part of this country where this isn't an issue, since there was never the terra nullius uninhabited land. There's an issue everywhere. And the stories of the dehumanized way of just taking these remains and in a way that conveys whatever the opposite of respect for human dignity is, that would be what it was. And so anyway, so that is our heritage, that those artifacts, excuse me, the remains and some of the possessions of those folks were just taken in the most unconscionable way, and now they can be returned in a conscionable way. Well, there are lots of other things that went wrong in the past where it's, well, what are we going to do now?
Okay.
Well, this one, here's what we're going to do now. And then, if I might shift to my wonderful comrade here, Vine Deloria Jr.
Yes.
Because well, Vine Deloria Jr. was the leading American Indian intellectual, and he taught at the University of Colorado, and his office was, oh, I don't know what, 200 feet from mine. And he had a very merry and irrepressible sense of humor. And by having an office 200 feet from his, I was often the target of that humor, which was wonderful, which is, I mean, it was one of the greatest opportunities in life to have Vine Deloria making fun of you, and you're laughing and laughing and laughing. Then you're thinking, oh, that's about me. Oh, well, okay. I mean, I guess I give him the material. And then he goes with it. So, oh, dear me. Dr. Limerick, as he would say. So he would, every once in a while, would do something that he didn't find impressive, and he'd be a little bit distant for a while. And then the telephone would ring, and it would be Vine going, Dr. Limerick, Dr. Limerick. They are going to be on Wednesday. They are serving the chocolate chip muffins at Perkins Restaurant. And would you like to come and have one of those? So oh yeah, I'm back. Anyway, so that's the muffins are not an important part of the story, but his sense of humor was extraordinary. And thank heavens is on public record, and his chapter 7 in Custer Died for Your Sins. Oh, audience, if you haven't read that, go get Custer Died for Your Sins and read chapter 7, which is on Indian humor, and just says very explicitly, that's how you know a people's going to make it. People are going to make it when they have that resource of humor. So, okay, so he he came back from a trip to Washington quite a number of years ago. He was a very important figure in the creation of the National Museum of the American Indian. And he was on governing boards, and he chaired, I think for a number of years, he chaired the repatriation committee. And good heavens for the Smithsonian, good heavens, what an enterprise. So there were, I may not get this may be a little bit of me inserting folkloric stuff here with pretty, I know that when I get to the documents, I know I will be on good solid ground here, but most of the people on this committee were trying to do the right thing. And there was one white fellow who had resources and contributed financially to the Smithsonian and so on, but he was not the least bit collaborative when it came to dealing. He had not heard me or anyone like me give these remarks about how this is our anti-fatalism. This is our way in which we take on the well, anyway. So this man was an obstacle, and he would often object when there was a question about returning some object to a tribe. He would object to that. So, and get overruled, but he made it much longer and harder. So one day, Fine always said the cleaning lady came up to him after a meeting, and the cleaning lady said, "Oh, that fellow left. One of the people here left a hat." So it was a quite nice men's hat, and so the cleaning lady said, "Well, should I give it to Lost and Found?" And Fine said, "Oh, I'll take it home and I'll mail it to him." So he was flying back to Colorado, and he thought about that hat. And I guess on the plane, he started writing this thing. And then when he got back, he had it all nicely written up. And it was a memo about what to do with this white man's hat. And should the hat be repatriated to the owner? No. So he wrote several very, I don't know, I can't remember how many, 10 or 11 points about why it should not be repatriated. And of course, all of them were direct parodies of what this hat owner had said at the meetings. And so he said, for instance, this man, we cannot give this hat back to this man because he treats it so carelessly. He leaves it. He doesn't, if we give it back to him, he won't treat it properly. He's not the kind, he doesn't have the kind of awareness that would, so we can't do that. And then he had a wonderful thing about the neglected research area of why it is that white men so often go bald and comparatively few Indian men, many Indian men just keep their hair. And so what could that be? And so science hadn't really taken that up yet. But why is it that so many white men are bald and so few Indian men are? Well, there's going to have to be some research on that. And at that point, white men's hats are going to be very important for the scientific research, we will really need to look carefully at those hats. And if we've given them all back, what are we gonna do with that? So at the end, go through all these, it's a very wonderful document, and it is in his papers, and it is available, I guess, to wider audiences now. But he concludes, he says, well, I know this is a very compelling set of arguments for not giving that man back his hat. I see that. I respect those arguments. And you can call me sentimental. You can call me soft-hearted. You can call me anything, but I think we should give him the hat back. Well, so then he got several of us to write things to accompany his document. I got to write pretty good start of an essay that was going to be called, it took off from Frederick Jackson Turner's The Significance of the Frontier in American History. And my essay was called The Significance of White Men's Hats in American History. And it was quite good and very solid in scholarship and so on. And then our friend Richard Hart, who was consulted with a lot of tribes, PhD in history, and really an interesting bird, he reconstituted himself. His name was Richard Hart, and he made him, well, E. Richard Hart. He turned himself into E. Richard Hat, and he had a degree in hat analysis technology, which you'll notice abbreviates to hat, from the university. His degree came from the University of Colorado at Boulder, and so we were just now going totally mad. We're just writing away at this stuff, all offering our expertise. And my understanding, and this is where I may veer off into folklore, that when all of those documents were put together, and the owner of the hat was really angry. He thought he'd been shamed and mocked and treated disrespectfully. And so he may not have stayed long on that committee, because we all wrote our documents on hats. I would like to return someday to my essay on white men's hats, because I think that was really very promising, about how every era of history you could, whether it was the coonskin cap or well, anyway, it was and all of the silly, well, I'm not going there. Anyway, it was just going to be a wonderful, wonderful essay. It's only about 2 pages long now, and that may be all the length that essay should ever have. That could be, but it was so fun to be enlisted onto that team of the people reflecting on white men's hats.
No, that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing. And what you say about the relationship of humor and trauma in repatriation contexts is not unlike what you said about student veterans. And I think we see this, right, that these situations are so heavy. So the atmosphere is so intense. The folks I've worked with have cultivated that ability to move into humor quickly, sometimes in an edgy way that is off-putting to folks who aren't aware of it, but it's absolutely fundamental to the kind of work that gets done. And I've come to understand that. Thanks for sharing that story. Well, we have some really great questions here, but if I might, just one last thought on repatriation. To what degree were you involved with the Colorado tribes and nations coming together to work together to try to designate for culturally unaffiliated human remains that are geographically associated with Colorado, who would take stewardship over those remains and then reinter them? And my understanding, it was ultimately the Ute Mountain Ute and Terry Knight and his family and others, if I've got the story right. But this was if possibly a decade-long process to come to an agreement between many groups. That's a very long story, of course, but to what degree were you aware of that process? And do you have any heartening stories or words of encouragement for us? We're not dealing with nearly that many groups of possible claimants here, but many folks with a common interest in seeing the right thing done to the ancestors, but possible differences of opinion as to who ought make the strongest claim and just how, if that makes sense.
Right. I was not in any way a figure in that. I was an appreciative observer.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that Ernest House, who was the director of the Commission on Indian Affairs here for the state of Colorado, who was Ute Mountain Ute, I believe it is Ernest. He has many great gifts, and one of them is his ability to be in the middle of contesting groups and respecting everyone, but also saying we'll have to move forward at some point. So he did stuff on mascots, and just actually this year, the legislature finally acted on that as a statewide policy, but Ernest has a great capacity to be, I think it's 48 tribes that have had some relationship to
Yes.
Colorado. And so there's a lot of people to work with, and he was really great on that. I think that the experience that I have had that is closest and much different, but the project with Rocky Mountain National Park that we've been doing for a long time. There are Ute tribal nations, and there are Arapaho folks, and there are Cheyenne folks, and there's Southern Cheyenne and Arapaho, and so there's quite a range of people involved,
Mhm.
and there is no particular uniformity to their telling of history, and why would there be?
Right.
And I usually was not chairing, like chaired a couple of meetings once or twice, as usually I would have a Native person as my teammate in that, but once or twice it was just me, the white person, doing my best and trying to think of ways to recognize that. Well, I think I'll just say one or two times I was thinking, obviously the Ute people do have the longer time duration claim.
Yeah.
And from time to time that would come up with the Cheyenne and Arapaho cast as much more of the latecomers. And that could make, especially as a non-native person chairing that was a sort of, I'm not quite sure what to do here, but I did have to, sometimes that would cause the people who were understood to be the latecomers to get pretty silent. And so I would have to think as hard as, this happens to be a true problem that I have, that I use maybe once or twice, that for whatever reason, this I've seen to be well made for Zoom here, because when I'm speaking to a group of people, or I will go to my left, I'm left-handed. So if I'm in a public room, I'll speak. The people sitting on the right side of the audience will begin to think, does she know we're here? Because
Yeah.
I was looking over to the left. So on one occasion, I try to leave this a bit vague, but either Cheyenne or Arapaho people were to my right, and they were not really getting fully included in the conversation. People were on my left, and so I said what is absolutely true. I said at a certain point, I just said, "Oh no, I think I'm doing that thing I do pretty often, which is I am in a room and there are different sides to the room, and I'm looking at the one side. So I'm just going to make sure. I bet people over on this side have been raising their hands, and I haven't even noticed because I've been looking over on that side. So that's a odd little story, which I guess I just told that story to an audience, and anyone who wants to hear it can now hear it. But it was just me trying to think, I am not going to step in there and arbitrate allocations of legitimacy to a claim. But I can say, let's make sure everybody's in here.
Yeah, right.
Conversation. But I mean, it's so funny to think. I guess that's the other side. Besides the vanishing Indian thing, there's the notion of the Indian, which is so unhelpful when tribal identity is so important. And if you want to refer, when people, it's not uncommon, I'm sure you've got this thousands of times too, are we supposed to say American Indian? Are we supposed to say Native American? And so on. Well, if you know the tribal name, say the tribal name.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you know the divisions within the tribe, well, then so much the better, but be aware that there might be some.
Right. And then don't go around being surprised when it turns out that there are divisions.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
yeah,
I had the best time once. This is just a little bit funny, but I was, Congress had come to a halt. It was after the Gingrich Revolution. There was a shutdown. It was very bad. Congress was completely deadlocked. Well, what else is new? But that was one of the first times that it really was just bad, and the parks were closing and all kinds of things. So just then, the New York Times asked me to review a book, Fergus Bordovich's book on the white man's Indian or something, and it was a lament by a white author of how ineffective tribal government was, how just riven with factions and divisions it was. And I'm thinking, I'm reading this book lamenting the distinctive troubles of tribal government. when my nation has a Congress that is just locked in place in opposition and factions. I mean, so it was really fun writing that review. I should look at that again someday because I'm sure I had a really good time saying, okay, well, you know, we got human beings in the story, huh? Is that what we're finding here, huh? And we're
Yeah.
gonna go around being disillusioned because they're having some of the, I mean, whatever they were doing, any reservation, it couldn't have been as ridiculous as what was going on in Congress. That was really, really something. So I've just felt so fortunate that I got to review that book in a prominent place where I could really point out the lack of perspective.
Yeah, no, well said, absolutely. The work I've done in Hawaii on these issues, very often the media will talk about multiple claimant groups as, look, they've been given a perfectly good law, why, and they can't even agree among themselves. And, you know, that's my reaction. And at what point did they stop being human? Hello, this is how we conduct ourselves, whether we're Hawaiian or otherwise.
Right.
So,
Right.
you know, this is so important to keep track of in these moments, but that specter of the exotic and the authentic will haunt at every turn, and that's just the way it is. No, your words are helpful. Thank you. Well, we don't have much time, just 15 minutes, and we have some great questions. Maybe we could turn to a couple of them, and I doubt we'll get to all of them. And some are longer than others. While you're looking over them, ones you could just tell us about briefly. Someone asks, the person says, I'm curious to learn more about ways to find funding for wonderful initiatives similar to those you describe. What is your process for finding funding, and how did you build a network of donors? I, of course, am quite curious to hear the answer.
It's a compelling question. I guess, well, I've certainly known faculty members who want nothing to do with fundraising.
Yeah.
And they are unlikely to be very good as fundraisers. So that eliminates certain people who might have things that they wanted to do and wish they had money, but have some notion that this would be beneath them or impure or something like that. So I certainly have seen that. I certainly have encountered problems in terms of making an overture that the university's fundraisers might have designated somebody for another cause. And then if I happen to be at a social gathering and well, I guess that's the answer to the question here. If I am at a social gathering, and I will go anywhere for an appetizer. I will just go anywhere for a beverage and an appetizer. I'm there. And if I am there with my beverage, an appetizer, and I meet someone, sometimes I'm doing a little bit of scoping of name tags, usually not. I just meet someone and I say, oh, hi, I know you from the whatever, didn't you do that? And if they say, as they often will say, well, what are you doing these days? I say, oh man, we have this opportunity. It is really astounding what we could be doing now. It's really great. And we don't seem to be able to do it right now, but I'm sure we'll figure this out. I'm sure we'll get this figured out. So that has been my fundraising method, is just to be genuinely exuberant over something that could happen, but that I can't quite make happen yet. So I have dinners at my house.
Yes.
When I used to, when the students could come to a home, and I have told people about those dinners and how delightful they are, and they stay funded that way. So
yeah, and I have to say, if I might butt in, that I've had the pleasure to be part of some of those and to see the magic when you bring students and community members together, and when community members recognize the obvious, that it takes money for that to happen. I've seen them speak to you directly about that. How can they make the next one happen? And so again, it's back to that student community member nexus, where sometimes we're the most irrelevant people in the room. It turns out, we faculty members.
Right. And then the other thing that was very important for my capacity to get the center set up and operating and to continue in that is that I am in the humanities, and I'd heard the routine about how, the sciences have all the money. Sciences and engineering, they get all the money, and they can do things because the dean gives them money, and then they do things because they got money from the dean or the provost or whatever. So I used to live in a world where I was part of, I'm not sure how much I led that chorus, but I participated in that. then I made a big mistake and I got to know scientists. Big mistake, because then I thought, well, they don't just get the money. They don't just, the dean doesn't, they're out there writing these grant proposals all the time. They're just, and as soon as they get one funded, well, then they have all these hostages to fortune. They're supporting graduate students, they're supporting postdocs and so on. So then, oh boy, one celebration, yay, we got the grant, yay. Oh, better get started writing the next one, because now we have all these people on our little ship. We have a tiny little ship here and we must keep our ship afloat here. And so how are we going to get the next wind in our sails? So I hung out with them. I learned from some of them that the National Science Foundation, for instance, had started, I think more than 20 years ago, a thing called broader impact. So if you put in a conventional science proposal, the National Science Foundation put in the requirement that you have to address the broader impacts of your research.
Yes.
And that's not intuitive to an atmospheric chemist. What would that mean to do that? Well, it could be a 6th grade class exercise that you would have someone who would work on a curriculum for elementary schools, or you could have somebody who is going to help with the fact that if you are an atmospheric chemist, you're heading right into the climate change fight. And so how are you going to deal with that? And so I found that was not exactly an open faucet. It was really something that humanities needs to be in there. Now you cannot be doing your individualistic humanities research project. I am writing a monograph. I finally realized that I'm not going to make a parody of this. That would be rude. I won't do that. So anyway, I'm doing this very narrow subject because this, I realize, has become the most important topic in my field of specialization. That's not going to work for the National Science Foundation broader impact. So you have to be kind of omnivorously curious and think, well, let's think about what is the larger context. There is nothing that any scientist or engineer does that does not benefit from thinking about that area of specialization over the long haul and what that has been in society and what impact it's had on human well-being or on human injury and so on. So getting written into those proposals is certainly one way.
Okay.
And then I always say hello and how kind of you to invite me. If anyone who has the word foundation on their business card says that they'd like to visit with you. So pretty early in the late 1990s, when we had our Atlas of the New West come out, a fellow from the Hewlett Foundation said he would like to visit with us. Great. So that was nice. And that turned into a relationship with them for a while. Same with the woman from the Ford Foundation. The Ford one especially was not very big, but it was a chance to test the waters there. And then the Mellon Foundation, you can't apply to the Mellon Foundation. You have to be contacted by them with an interest. But how would you get contacted by the Mellon Foundation? Well, you would just do a bunch of stuff.
Right.
And you would be spoken of as doing a bunch of stuff. So you're kind of headed somewhere, but you can't say
exactly.
Here's where I am and I'm going there. And it was a delight to see a message from interest, the subject line interest from the Mellon Foundation. And now we do have a very sizable grant for me to help young historians repurpose their academic skills. This goes back to you at that workshop seminar on American religion that we're at, but I can help young people sharpen their message, remember what it was that they wanted to find out and what they wanted to be able to offer humanity and other scholars. There's no reason to exclude other scholars on that. So we have these academic skills repurposing workshops.
That sounds great. No, wonderful. Great. Well, these are all great ideas. Thanks for brainstorming. And as I've told you before, you might get a message from me saying, hey, can we have another talk about all this? So I'll look forward to that. Thank you. Well, we don't have much time. I want to address one question myself very briefly. And then maybe while I'm doing that, Patty, if you could look at Olga's question. Do you have access? She's the next one on the list. Yeah, you take a look and I'll respond to this one question. So this is for Stephen Lee Bird. Thank you for asking your question, Mr. Bird. It's quite specific to the situation here at UCSB. It's about various problems the institution is facing with housing, students, and cost and so forth. I'm happy to talk about that myself. I'm a newcomer. Some of these same questions occurred to me. So I just invite you, Mr. Bird, reach out to me. Let's sit down. And if I can figure out who can best answer some of these questions on campus, I'll get them there as well, because they deserve an answer. I just don't think that Professor Limerick's the person to answer our campus specific questions. Thank you.
No. So I wish I were. And I'm a quick learner, but I'm not that quick. So we only have a couple minutes here. So, okay. So yes, so Olga has raised a really, really important thing. What will happen? She's a PhD candidate. What will happen to graduate students who are taken with this idea, or assistant professors, untenured assistant professors, if they would like to engage in a public facing activity? What is going to become of them when they go through the mill and they confront the hurdles? And so I have been in higher education since I started at Santa Cruz in 1968. I don't think as an undergraduate, I ever heard anyone, why would a professor ever have said to me things about academic administration and revising the criteria for promotion? Nobody ever talked to me about that. But as soon as I was a little bit in that world, I started hearing hopes. People, not everyone, but a few people would say, we really have to rethink how we evaluate merit, how we, what our metrics are for success in the humanities. We really do have to rethink what we're, especially in the publisher parish thing, as it used to be called. I suppose probably should still be called, since it hangs around. It's a bad situation that we have had decades of people in good positions saying we need to change this. It's not, it makes no sense to have, it's back to the transmission lines of renewable energy. It doesn't make any sense to have all of this high-powered mental activity racing along if it doesn't have, it's an engine that's not hooked up to a vehicle sitting on a curb, just sitting there. So how do we get that hooked up? Well, it's any cultural subsetting is going to have that, of people convinced that what happened to them is what should happen to the next set of recruits. And so but this is how I was trained. Alrighty, so that's how you were trained. Well, alrighty, is the world exactly as it was when you were undergoing that training? No, well then maybe so. But it's a very conformist system, and I didn't get that for a long time. As a young person, I was really, I was more inclined to believe the statements about the rewards for fresh thinking, for innovative approaches, and I believed it. And I so far I've only taken a few flesh wounds. I mean, I haven't really, nobody ever did me any serious damage, but it was every once in a while they would posture as if they were going to do me serious damage, because I am a maverick, and my book Legacy of Conquest did veer from a lot of the conventional stuff and so on. So I am in a very strange situation, because I did do things that a normal wise person wouldn't do. And I am all the more aware of why young scholars are appropriately cautious about challenging the status quo and having fresh approaches that are anything but kind of moderate, kind of tentative. So I have not seen anywhere as much change in this as I would like. And I think young people, but it's so terrible. I've struggled with this for years. Do I really have to say, if I talk to a young person who's just started in graduate school and they dream of the kind of life I lead, of being out in the world, do I really have to say, oh, I'm so glad you want to do that? Okay, so we have probably 5 or 6 more years in graduate school. Okay, then we're going to have the 6.5 or 7 years to tenure. Okay, so yes, keep those dreams, but we are talking probably 12 years from now. It's like, oh no. It's the wonderful scene in Lewis Carroll's Through the Looking Glass, I think it's Through the Looking Glass, where the White Queen is going to hire Alice, and or she wants to hire Alice. She doesn't succeed, but she says she'd like to have Alice work for her. And what will the rewards be? What will the wages be? The White Queen says it's jam every other day. And Alice inquires more into that, and it turns out it's always jam yesterday and jam tomorrow, but never jam today. So, so it's, oh, wait, don't do that. Don't do this to us. Don't do the 12 years from now, you could do the thing that is really driving you in your vision. So that's where you have to say that the academic job crisis is going to be our friend eventually in that, because you cannot say to young people, stay within these narrow boundaries, stay there and you will succeed. It will be 12 years from now, but you will have the PhD and you will have tenure, and then you can go out into the world and do what you want to do with wider audiences. So there's just all kinds of reasons, and that's why I feel so lucky with the Mellon Project to say, well, be the person who goes for a job interview and says, I have these, never pit scholarly credibility against public engagement. Never do that. Lots of people do that. But if you are going to try to speak to a public audience and you are really not quite certain if you are quoting accurately from sources, you should just say to the public audience, goodbye, I shouldn't have imposed on you. I'll hope to come back when I have checked my sources and I'm sure that what I'm telling you is reliable. And don't go, I'm not going to name names, but a very conservative, famous public figure once said to me, this is 15 years or so ago, this famous, very tempting to drop his name, but I won't. Anyway, he was somebody who you would not think of as really enjoying universities. But I said to this man, who was a pretty good friend, I said, I'm thinking, I get so frustrated sometimes with bureaucracy in universities. I think I might just, maybe I'll just leave and have a nonprofit. This man said to me, don't do that. The university, that's your credibility. You said that? If I told you his name, you'd think, oh, he said that. But he did say that, and it is my credibility. And so I'm so tired of the notion that you can do scholarly credibility or you can do public engagement and they're somehow pulling against each other. They're so intertwined on that. So I think that the various crises in higher education really do open the door for many of us at many levels to say, we have to change how we evaluate accomplishment.
Yeah, that resonates in my world for sure, Patty. And I think back to where we started, I think the students might lead us out of this to some degree because they expect it increasingly. I haven't been teaching forever, but a couple decades, and more students are asking your question, the then what or the so what. Where do we go from here questions? I get that much more than I used to. And if we're not prepared to address that within the walls of the ivory tower to our own students, then we've manifestly failed. And I think as administrations begin to understand that, as tenuring committees begin to understand that our students demand it of us, that will be one of the pivots in all of this. At least I'm hopeful.
And our society needs us
to
do this. So there was a very controversial exhibit on the American West and art. The National Museum of American Art had an exhibit called "What the West is America," and it became a very wild fray, and senators were storming around and threatening the Smithsonian budget and so on. So I got to be a part of defending the Smithsonian's Museum of American Art, National Museum of American Art, and the director of the National Museum of American Art in 1991 called me and asked me to come be on a panel to defend the Smithsonian against the senators who wanted to cut the budget because of this exhibit. It just said Western history is not really as pretty as a Remington painting is. That's said more than that. But anyway, so I get this phone call from the director of the museum at Smithsonian, and she says, "Can you come do that?" I said, "I can't. I really don't have time. I can't. I don't have 2 or 3 days to go." She said, "You have to do it." I said, "I really can't do it." She said, "Your nation needs you." Well, nobody had ever said that to me before, but I think I have said it to myself every week, and not with the just the nation needs all of us. It's all hands on deck. It is totally all hands on deck. And the nation needs us. So that's the reason why this has to change.
Yeah, no, well said. Thank you. I mean, if not now, when, right? What are we waiting for here?
Right,
We're in
right.
crisis on every front. Let's do this. It's not rocket science.
Right.
And we know scientists, they can help. But no, I hear you. Well, I think on that note, out of respect for your time and our audience, we'll call it a night. We are so grateful. I wish you were in the room. I wish we were all in a room together so you could see the gratitude of all of us. So, and we really do look forward to welcoming you here to Santa Barbara. We'll choose a winter time when it really makes a difference to be out of Boulder and show you around, and you can help us brainstorm a bit more about ways to engage student veterans better in our classes and on campus in general and so forth, various things we've talked about. So I'll follow up on that part. But for now, thank you for beaming in, sharing your thoughts, teaching us. We're grateful. And thank you, audience folks. Please tune in 2 weeks to hear Lisa Sedaris. And for now, everyone have a great night. And thank you again, Professor Limerick. It was fantastic.
Thank you so much. Great.
Okay, good night, everybody.